Previously, in part 1 of this adventure, I left Loch and travelled to Eilean Mor, one of the McCormick Islands off the mouth of Loch Sween. I moored up for the night and enjoyed an evening in the company of Bill, one of the island trustees. The following day I headed for Gigha and Cara to meet up with some kayaking friends. However, I got a text saying we were no longer going due to the weather forecasting strong winds. Having visited Gigha, I then landed in Cara, where I upset the Cara brownie, the spirit of a murdered inhabitant of the island. I forgot to pay him homage and remove my hat when I landed. I checked the weather forecast and discovered strong winds were arriving that evening and forecast to last 4 or 5 days. I decided to leave Cara and head for the sheltered waters of Loch Tarbert Jura. The sea was still flat calm as I made haste while the sun shone, and crossed the 13 miles of open sea to the sound of Eilean. It took less than an hour as the sea was mill pond still all the way to the entrance of the sound, where a slight breeze started to ripple the water. I was also in luck that the now flooding tide would assist carry me up the sound, as it's a very tidal stretch of water. Over to starboard, on my right-hand side, the paps of Jura started to look magnificent in the clear atmosphere, while over to port, or on my left-hand side, Port Askig and Eilean looked very peaceful and quiet. And then I was there, crossing the mouth of my favourite sea loch in the area. I'm generally very lucky when I visit Loch Tarbert, as in the past it's always been during hot, dry weather. I headed for a spot I often camp at Ruin Talon Bay. When I landed, set up my chair, enjoyed sitting soaking in the warmth of the sun, had a coffee and admired the views. I couldn't help notice the 2 boats in the bay. I often chat with their owners, Craig and Jim, who look after the deer on the estate. I didn't see Craig this time round, but Jim stopped for a blether. We were keeping busy looking for discarded deer antlers, presumably to sell as horn. Refreshed, relaxed and relieved, I then let the drone loose to get its afternoon exercise. It took a wander across the raised beach which Jura is famous for. I recalled the first time I came here. It was during a July heatwave, and I went walking across this raised beach. The stones radiated the heat and almost scorched my feet. I struggled across, my head hung low, dying for water, and ahead of me was a deer, and it was very clear it was struggling in the heat too. Surveying this stunning scene in the warmth of the May sun, it was hard to believe that within hours the wind would get up, then during the night a spectacular electric storm with torrential rain would pass overhead. Although I found it hard to believe the weather would change so quickly, I knew round Talon Bay was a bit exposed to the elements for me sleeping in my small canvas cabin cruiser, so I headed deeper into the loch to find a more sheltered area. Even as I travelled, the wind started to rise, blowing from the southeast, which the forecast agreed on. So I took shelter from southeast wind close in behind a low-lying island where the loch narrows. I was happy enough I was out of the way of any waves, as the wind would be offshore at this location. It was low tide when I landed, which gave me the distance I needed to be from the island to keep afloat during the overnight low tide. I carried my cooking gear up the beach, which was not the easiest task on slippery seaweed, but I knew it would be harder at high tide, getting the boat through the weed and to the shore. After my dinner, I had a look around the island I was on. I'm always a little surprised to see so many ruins of old houses in these very remote places. Although it was a bit breezy, it was still a lovely evening. I noticed Jim was also moored up for the night behind the next island down from me. I retired early as the wind was now blowing quite hard, and lay on top of my bed in the boat reading. I noticed I was slowly heading for rocks. Yep, a now strong wind was catching the tent and dragging the anchor. Fortunately, I had not fallen asleep, so in underwear only, I hauled up the anchor and found that it was a large ball of green seaweed. Although I was over a mud bottom, the anchor point couldn't get through the weed. I tried to land on the shore that I had my dinner on, but the seaweed would not let me get there. In fact, the prop caught in a large clump which was growing from a stone on the seabed. The prop wound the seaweed in and the stone flew upwards, hitting and damaging my prop as shown in this photo I took later. Fortunately, I always carry a spare prop, and while I have not damaged one this way before, I am aware it happens quite regularly. So if you don't carry a spare prop in your boat, it's very much worth thinking about, as they can get damaged quite easily. Luckily, it was only a chip out of one edge, and the prop kept me off the rocks and gave me time to fully recover the dragging anchor. Then I headed out the bay as fast as I could go. I needed to find a safe shelter spot as soon as possible. This situation illustrates how quickly things can mount up and turn to shit very quickly. Heading for shelter was a bit of a struggle too, as the tent cabin caused a lot of windage as I crossed the loch. Fortunately, I know the loch well, so headed for a sheltered narrow channel that leads to the inner basin. I knew there were a couple of mooring buoys there, and my plan was to tie onto one, and hopefully it would be sheltered there too. These clips were taken in the morning after the storm had passed. Jim had also headed for shelter here too, as he was getting bounced around behind his island. I don't have any video of the storm or my experiences that night, as I had too much to think about getting to shelter. Around 1 a.m. the thunder and lightning started, and it lasted for around an hour. Then the downpour started, which also lasted for around an hour. It was a rough night for me and inflatable cabin cruiser, but I survived to tell the tale. By 7 a.m. in the morning it had all passed as if nothing had happened. The winds dropped and the rain had stopped. I freed myself from a mooring buoy, then headed up the channel towards the inner basin. I was looking for somewhere suitable to land, sort myself out and also have a coffee and breakfast. I changed over to my spare propeller, had breakfast, then let the drone check out my surroundings, which gave me time to think of what I was going to do now. One thing was for sure, I didn't want another night like the previous night. It was when the drone returned and didn't complain about being too windy, I decided what I was going to do next. I can't get a phone signal here to check the weather forecast, but thought if a drone can fly, surely I can fly up the exposed western side of Jura, go across the Corryvreckan Whirlpool and Great Race, then I could still make Easdale for Saturday evening. After all, it was only Thursday just now. I battened down all hatches and headed out of shelter of the inner basin, into Loch Tarbert itself, heading for open sea. To begin with, all was well as I was still in the shelter of Loch Tarbert. Then, even leaving the loch, although I was getting bounced about quite a bit, there were few waves breaking. But I knew I wasn't round the first point yet, where I would be exposed to the north winds blowing down Jura. I also realised that once I started there was no shelter for a boat until after I crossed the crux of the route, the Corryvreckan Gap. I decided that before committing myself I should turn back into Ruintallen Bay, where I could get a phone signal to check the weather. I'm glad I did, because when I got the new forecast, it was for north winds gusting to 30 miles per hour, long before I would reach the Corryvreckan. And every day was to be the same, winds 20 miles per hour gusting to 35 miles per hour for the next 4 days. I had to accept I was now stormbound in Loch Tarbert. At least the loch itself was sheltered, and I now had a plan. My sleeping gear was a little damp from the torrential rain and condensation the night before, so I was now heading for Crewe Bothy, not far from where I'd tied on to the buoy the previous night. Only I couldn't go there then, as the wind was from the southeast and dumping waves on the shore. Now the wind has swung round to the north. The shore at the bothy would be calm and the offshore winds. Checking the bothy out, I was delighted to see I had the place to myself. It has 2 rooms, so even if another party arrived, it was very possible I would still have a room to myself. I decided to set up my bed in the brighter of the 2 rooms. I then sat outside, allowing the warm sun and wind to completely dry off my sleeping gear, as I happily slurped a beer to celebrate my decision to shelter from the winds in Loch Tarbert. I clambered to the top of a small hill beside the bothy to survey my surroundings and see if I could get a phone signal. Unfortunately, I couldn't get 4G to check the weather, but the view made it worthwhile. A yacht anchored in the bay as it too sheltered from strong winds. At supper time, I made my favourite dish, and if you wonder why I call Guinness gravy, this is the reason. A large burger cooked in Guinness is absolutely delicious, and has the advantage I have plenty gravy left to wash the food down. I then topped the burger with a healthy dollop of Camberzola cheese before putting it in a bread roll and scoffing. Absolutely delicious. There are 2 burgers in a pack, so I had the same supper the following evening. I wasn't going to starve while being stormbound. Of course, any nutritionist will say you need 5 portions of fruit per day, especially when at sea, as it's easy to get scurvy. I followed my burger bun with a mixed fresh fruit dessert of banana, satsuma and grapes, with a little yellow nectar added to make a nice syrup. I was spoiling myself while I was stuck in my solitude. I'm also experienced enough to know that sometimes I do get stormbound, and it's all just part of exploring the inner Hebrides in small boats. So I always carry tinned food to last 5 days. Although stormbound for 4 days, I had enough food to last another 2 days on top of that. And that was without going in half rations. My only problem was I ran short of gravy and nectar before I get home. Even so, I didn't suffer too much, as the owner of the yacht, Tina Louise, saw my predicament, so came ashore on my last night in Loch Tarbert, bringing a full bottle of Talisker whisky with him. He didn't have any left when he went back to his boat. I salute you, sir, and very much appreciate you helping a fellow stormbound skipper out. Thank you. To pass my time, I sometimes just relaxed and read one of the many books left in the bothy. I kept clean by washing in the fresh water burn beside the bothy. Although the winds were strong, it was sunny and warm most of the time. I went fishing in a sheltered narrow channel leading to the inner basin, and caught a few very small pollock, which would have saved my bacon if I had been starving. Cooked and fish pasted, they would have been edible. I also caught a small sea trout, which would have been my bacon if it was an inch longer, but I put him safely back, preferring a tin of Irish stew for supper that night. I didn't get much opportunity to exercise the drone, but did manage a quick flight in between gusts on one of the days. It complained about the strong winds, though, as the controller does monitor wind strength, so I landed again. You may notice the number 60 written in stone on the shore by a previous visitor. I thought if I became really bored I would turn it into 70, but I never get that bored. In fact, I was actually enjoying every moment of my storm-bound imprisonment. I also spent a fair amount of time walking the hills behind the bothy. I managed to find several locations where I could get a 4G signal to check the weather forecasts. One of the locations only about a kilometre from the bothy. I kept a close eye on where I put my feet, as twice I disturbed adders, Scotland's only poisonous snake. Fortunately, they heard me coming and slithered out of sight rather than confront me. They went back quickly. I didn't get any videos of them. I found walking hard going. There was no path to follow, though I did follow the deer tracks where they existed. I kept well clear of the boulders, as that was where the snakes seemed to live. The views from the top made it all worthwhile. On one of the days, I even managed to let the drone have a look around. The inner loch can be quite deceptive, and at times it felt as if the winds had dropped, but in reality the open sea was still very choppy. On the Friday I caught a quick glimpse of 5 large ribs from the Easdale Rib Rendezvous outing. We went into the inner loch to shelter for lunch. I had expected to see a few more boats, but presume the sea condition kept the rest in more sheltered waters. When I got up on the Sunday morning, despite the forecast still predicting strong winds, I couldn't help notice it was flat calm and not a breath of wind anywhere. I quickly packed all my gear up and headed up Loch Tarbert to the entrance of the loch, hoping to get to Easdale before the winds got up. However, as I approached open sea, I watched a large yacht heading out. As soon as it cleared the headland, it was blown over to around 45 degrees, so it was obvious there was still a strong wind around. I headed north for several kilometres, but found sea conditions were still hard going. So once again I headed back to Ruintallen, where I got a phone signal, and phoned some friends at Easdale who told me it was still blowing a good force 5 there. So I decided to backtrack to the bothy, as the following day's forecast was for light winds. And sure enough, the following morning was another flat, calm morning. I swept the bothy clean and then headed on my way. This time even the sea was calm, with only a slight ripple on its surface, as I headed north towards the Gigha Gap. As I approached the Gigha Gap, which is the world's third largest whirlpool, the sea flattened like a mill pond. I headed diagonally through the gap, and even the whirlpool area was now calm, with only a few hydraulic boils and swirling eddies showing its position. My patience had paid off, as I suspect this area would have been extremely turbulent in force 4 and above winds. Soon I was approaching Easdale, having missed the Rib Rendezvous weekend. However, if I'm honest, I wasn't sorry, as travelling up the Sound of Mull in the company of over 100 boats is not really my idea of fun, even in a calm day, never mind a strong windy day. However, I do enjoy making videos, and as you can see from this one, I had a great time that week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.